welcome to the Nightmare Hour. This is episode 1. We've moved on from episode 0. This is the real episode. Like, there's no more just chatting about us. We're going to get serious. And we were talking before this, and I mean, it's our first episode, so we don't really have a format, but our planned format was to maybe start a little more casual, talk amongst ourselves, maybe some news items and stuff, kind of do a little casual dip in. But as if you follow us on social media or been listening at all, you know our topic is massive. So we're just going to get started and start doing it this week. And if you didn't follow along, our plan is to do a 2-part episode about the Amityville Horror and the Amityville Horror murders. So this week, I think we're dealing with all like the true stories and the purported true stories, like all factual, no movies or anything. And then next week, we'll talk more about the movies and like the cultural like fallout of all of that. So, and it's not just me, even though I've talked this whole time. Would you like to introduce yourself, Adam?
I think you just did. I am Adam. I'm the other side of this microphone. So yeah, this was
It's a 2-sided microphone.
Yeah, we're right next. It's like Hall & Oates' microphone.
Yeah.
I think this was I just put it out on a whim there for our first story because it not only has true crime, but it has a supernatural element. And of course, there's a number of films. What shocked me is the sheer number of films. And then
I had no idea it's that many.
Yeah, there's a lot of content here. And of course, a ton of inspiration. So yeah, we won't really talk too much right now. Let's just, I guess, dive right in. So how this will work is Eric's going to handle, did you already say it? Did you already say what you're going to do?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I don't say anything.
So you did mention it was a 2-part episode. So Eric is going to handle the DeFeo murders and that timeline all the way up until I take over in, I believe, December 74. I have my notes somewhere. There's a lot of dates on here. So
nice
we were
here. Your notes somewhere.
75. Sorry, December 75. So Eric's going to take over now, and I'll just be the audience, and that's kind of how this will work. Is when he tells the story, I'll be asking any questions, I'll be the color commentator, I guess, in this.
Oh, all right. You're Dick Vitale, is that right? Diamond Sports Reference, is that the right one?
I think that is definitely a sports reference.
Okay, sweet.
Okay, so I guess we'll just get into it. There's no long talking
so
here.
Much to do here. And,
this is the truest story that we could tell for what is now dubbed the Amityville Horror. Eric?
Yeah.
Where do we start?
I started on the internet, so you don't have to.
Hey,
I'll talk about my process. Or did you have something?
Yeah, I don't know if you had this, but I can just drop this as 2 sentences. So the Amityville house, it was built in 1927. It's a 5-bedroom house, 3-bath, Dutch colonial style house set at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. The house featured a swimming pool and a boathouse and was situated alongside of a canal. Of course.
Yeah, I like, speaking of that, like I just focused so much on the DeFeos, I didn't go to the future, and I've heard mixed reports. Does this house still stand? Or is it?
Yes.
I've heard it does. It's still there?
Yep.
Okay. Well, good to know.
And then this, of course, Amityville is located just outside of Long Island, New York. The population as of today is only 9,400, so I'm guessing it was, not horribly, but it was very small, probably in the 70s.
More people?
Yeah. I was trying to see if I can find something for the population, but I don't see it. We'll just assume it's probably like 5,000 or 6,000.
Yeah, we're not Wikipedia. Like, we don't know what their textiles situation is or what their major export is. Nobody.
Yeah. So that's the setup of the house. 1927 is when it was built, and then I'm going to hand it to you, Eric. Let's introduce me to the DeFeos and what's up with them and your process. What was your process?
My process, like, there's so much information on the internet and it's all everywhere. So everything I saw, I cross-reference. So everything if you listening along find something that's factually inaccurate, please let us know, because I tried really hard to cross-reference and then cross-reference again everything I read. And there's a lot of conflicting information out there. So hopefully this is as near as truth as we can get. And I did, before I want to start, one of the main sources, like the verbiage and stuff that I found that was really good, was one Erin Kelly from allthingsinteresting.com. I don't know, but they did a really good job. So I started with their stuff and I cross-referenced. Anyway, just wanted to make sure I gave credit where credit's due. we're starting with the actual fact checks. No paranormal necessarily. This was a crime that happened in this house, and it was Ronald DeFeo Jr. And everything I read about his family, his childhood, was comfortable. Like nothing about this family would say, "Oh, that's a troubled family." Like they lived in a what'd you say, 5-bedroom house.
Yeah.
Everything was going well. They lived in a nice, affluent part of New York. It was picture perfect, monetarily comfortable, everything. According to reports, though, his father was domineering and abusive. So, like the mother was very diminutive behind it. Like she never really tried to combat the overbearing father. And it is like Ronald DeFeo Jr., because of that, grew into like an increasingly troubled young adulthood that relied on drugs and alcohol. So he was self-medicating basically. There's reports that he's like him and his father had several like run-ins physically, like fights, and even at one point before all this threatened his father with a gun. Excuse me, I had a beer sip. With all these troubles, his parents still tried to help him, and they gave him a weekly stipend and gifts that would like hopefully like calm him down, like bring them all together. And they all still lived under the same roof. When he was 18, he got a job at the family-owned dealership, but he didn't even show up. But they still paid him. Like, so this kid had a no. I don't know about the domineering and the fights with his father, but it seemed like at least they're making an effort to like, hey, like here's money, you can still live with us, and here's a job. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Was this a Chrysler dealership?
Is that our new sponsor?
You son of a bitch! You're already picking apart my story. Well, I imagine at the time there's only like a handful of car companies, so Chrysler being one of those.
I don't know. Is Chrysler like a real? Is it like one of those like it's a Ford knockoff? Like it's the Ford.
Yeah, it was owned by Chevrolet.
You're just saying that because they're both C's.
Yes, I am. Okay, sorry to interrupt you. So they've done their best to give him, even though it sounded like he already had a relatively good childhood, and even better childhood or better adulthood.
Yeah, it just honestly, I mean, it's decades later, and I'm not trying to play like psychologist or anything, but for everything I read, no one ever talked about the other kids being like having troubles or depending on drugs and alcohol. It just seemed like this kid had issues that he didn't quite know how to deal with. Like he just was, self-medicating for some mental problems that seemed like, I mean, I'm sure his father played a role because there's several places I saw that he was not, super friendly and like he'd more wrestle you than hug you kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, on that fateful day in '74 that we all know about, he decided to leave work at noon out of boredom. So I mean, that's pretty good life right there, right? Like I'm bored. Bye.
And he was working at the dealership, right?
Yeah. Like he's working at his family dealership. So he was just like, I'm out.
And then his dad was like, okay.
Well, his dad's dead, and spoiler alert.
Well, yeah.
So no fight from his father at that point. No arguments. But then he met his friends at a bar and constantly calling his house to no answer and complaining about it loudly to anyone who would listen, like at the bar. Like, so I mean, we've all listened to enough true crime that's like trying really hard to make an alibi for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, no one's answering my family's phone. Weird. Let's have another beer and get to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually he left saying he's going to go home. And then, according to the book American Mass Murderers by Valerie Plaza, he re-entered the bar yelling. After a while, he re-entered yelling, "You've got to help me. I think my mother and father are shot." Some patrons followed him back to the house and became witnesses of the horrifying thing inside.
Wait, so he went from I don't know where they are to leaving, coming back, and be like, I think they've been shot.
Yeah, and he didn't call the police or anything. He just went back to the bar to like.
Interesting.
So he said, "Hey, come check it out." And this is where things get weird, and I think kind of fuel into the Amityville paranormal haunting, the whole story afterwards. All 6 bodies were found in their beds, positioned on their stomachs. They're all shot with the same high-powered rifle, later determined to be around 3:15 a.m., but we don't know that yet. Like, they didn't have time of death or anything at this point. There's no signs of any struggle present in the bodies or evidence that they were drugged. No neighbors who were awake reporting any gunshots. Only the dog barking was reported from neighbors. That's the only thing they heard. No one heard any gunshots.
I don't know
That's
how close.
weird.
Yeah, I don't know how close the next neighbor is. I've seen some photos. I think it's actually a pretty normal neighborhood. I know they live at the end of a street because they're on the water. But I'm pretty certain that they have a neighbor right next to them. Like, if you're looking at the house to the right and across the street, there are 2 neighbors. So I think it's like if a gun was fired in a neighborhood, you would probably hear it. Somebody would presumably hear it.
Mm-hmm. That's the weird thing to me beyond that is 6 bodies were found in their beds. Like, they definitely heard it. Like, whoever wasn't the first to get shot would definitely hear a high-powered rifle, like, in the house.
Well, and it's nearly impossible, right? Like, if someone gets shot upstairs or down the hall, I'm not going to be laying on my belly. First of all, I'm probably going to make a fuss. I'm going to get up.
Right, and what are the, like, everything away, like, what are the odds that all 6 people were sleeping on their bellies?
0, because only psychopaths sleep on their bellies. And the psychopath in this instance is killing people, so he's not.
Yeah, he's not sleeping. Yeah.
Were they all killed with the same type of gun?
Same gun, exact same gun.
Oh, exact same gun. So same bullet. So unless like 6 people had the exact same gun and all shot within the same few seconds, it would virtually be impossible for this and a family of belly sleepers. It's fully impossible for this to have basically happen in like a regular circumstance.
Right. That's what and then, like, obviously, as true crime usually does, his alibi begins to crumble when the time of death is marked at 3:15 a.m., which is way before he ever left the house. He frantically changed his stories, and he did this so many times during this investigation. And that's what's interesting to me is there's like multiple explanations to the point that I don't know what's going on. His first explanation was that he claimed that a mob hitman, Louis Fellini, killed his family and made him watch. Which, I mean, that's a big one out of the gate. Just like setting, I don't know, and it doesn't really work anyway with his original alibi, because why is he trying to pretend? I think by, like, you know, they're not answering their phone. What, like, if you watched your family get killed by a mob boss,
and also, I mean, everything I know about mob bosses in general is that it's generally like a specific, like, you know, I'm going to break your legs because you owe me a debt, but I'm not just going to kill you. Like,
mob bosses don't kill anyone; they just tell other people to kill people, right?
Yeah,
but the boss.
But even like, I mean, we're basically talking about like we learned everything from a Martin Scorsese film, but like
horses' heads.
Yeah. I mean, they don't like rarely. Especially in this time frame, the old school style of mob, you don't see like full family hits, especially with children, women and children. Like, generally they were left alone in those classic mob stories, true stories. Even like women and children were usually like left free. So that doesn't really fit the MO of the time of what mobs generally did.
Right. And I mean, regardless.
Sorry, I was a little away from my mic. Could you hear me fine?
Yeah, you were fine.
I didn't know. I was singing
the double-sided mic's getting tricky.
Yeah. All right.
But it didn't matter anyway, because they went and, you know, police have to do due diligence on everything that is told to them. So they went and interviewed Fellini, and he was out of state at the time. So he had a completely like reasonable alibi and I could not find on the internet. So if anyone knows out here, like, why Louis Fellini and how DeFeo knew this guy and why he would point at a mob boss as like, that seems just crazy to me, and I could not find any explanation of that. So if anyone knows out there, why?
I'm guessing maybe it's because the car dealership. It feels like that car dealers and like mobsters go pretty hand in hand.
I guess so, but that's still like, that's a bold move. Like, that's like going after like Gotti.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, like, once that alibi came around, DeFeo immediately confessed to police that he murdered his family all by himself. He confessed. He's like, yeah, I did it. But then the trial started in October 14th, 1975. They tried to do the classic insanity plea at this point, claiming that DeFeo heard voices that told him to kill his family. This didn't really stand up either, though, this new explanation, because the prosecution argued that there's no question the dude's got some problems, and he used drugs, and that's all. Like,
And drugs are bad.
Yeah, and they can make you do weird things. We've all seen this. They're basically saying he knew what he did when he shot him, because when he was talking to police before all this, he asked what he had to do to collect on his father's life insurance. So, like,
yeah,
that shows sanity right there. Like that shows a motive right there. You're like, can I get my dad's money real quick? Like, that's not voices. And
yeah, that's not the smartest move, probably, to just be like poking around. Like, again, one more time, real quick. If my dad dies, or how do I again cash that check? How long does it take till they get the check? I'm just curious.
Yeah, just doing it. And then like later, even later, like after he was sentenced. Oh, I skipped over that part. He was convicted, obviously, and on 6 counts of second-degree murder and 6 concurrent sentences of 25 years to life. So he's in prison for all his days. But then, like, obviously this was like a huge case, like, of mass shooting in a home. So people kept trying to talk to this guy and figure out why and how and what's going on. He then changes the story again and alleges that his sister Dawn killed their father, and then the distraught mother killed all the siblings, because that's what you do after your daughter killed your dad. And in this scenario, DeFeo claimed he only killed his mother in an attempt to like protect his siblings. That was his news story. Then in 1990, he changed it just a little bit again. He said Don was shooting all the DeFeos before he himself had to kill Don. And then, I mean, secondary people talk about there had to be a second shooter, but I don't even think that explains it. Like, we were talking about everyone still being in bed and stuff. You'd have, like you said, you'd have to have 6 shooters, I would think, easily, right?
I mean, I would guess at least 6 shooters, and not a 6-shooter. Sorry, I didn't want
to. Straight from the hip. Then another one in we're in the 2000s now. Rick Osong, who wrote The Night the DeFeos Died. According to him, he went to the prison and talked to DeFeo for about 6 hours. However, later in the radio show, DeFeo, he wrote a letter to a radio show denying he ever talked to Osong at all, saying that he immediately left the interview and did not speak to him. So who knows what? But in this book, Osong claims that he committed the murders with his sister Dawn and 2 friends, Augie DeGeneres, like DeGeneres, but with an O. So not Ellen, but Augie, and Bobby Kelsky, out of desperation because his parents had plotted to kill him. So, I mean, obviously, you gotta hit first. Allegedly, he claimed that after a furious row with his father, he and his sister planned to kill their parents, and that Dawn murdered the children in order to eliminate witnesses. He said he was so enraged to discover that his sister killed their siblings that he knocked her unconscious onto her bed and shot her in the head. Police say that found traces of unburned gunpowder on Dunn's nightgown, which DeFeo says proves that she discharged a firearm.
So she was found underneath the bed?
No, she was on her bed. She was belly down like everybody else.
Oh, okay.
He said he knocked her out and then shot her in the head. And then he was saying that the fact that the forensic evidence that she had the gunpowder on her nightgown that proves that she just discharged a firearm. But unfortunately, forensics doesn't work that way. Like that just means that she was shot. Basically, when you shoot, you don't get unburned gunpowder on on your clothes. That means that the bullet hit you, like when it was right next to you, right on you, right up against you. I kind of got lost in my notes here. Yeah, basically what I said.
So he's basically at this point his motive is he found out that there's a plot by his parents to kill him.
Yeah.
So him and the oldest sister Dawn decided to
Kill the
stop that and retaliate. So kill their parents. Rather, nobody's talking to each other, obviously. And then in the heat of the moment, she also killed the younger siblings, and that pissed him off. So he knocked her out and then shot her.
Yeah, that's what he's saying.
Okay.
But then ballistic expert Alfred Pina testified that the unburned gunpowder is discharged through the muzzle of a weapon. So what I was saying, so that she was in proximity to the muzzle, not the trigger. So that just means
you can tell this was a 1970s interview because they used the term muzzle.
Yeah.
We're the layman terms now is just front of the gun.
Yeah.
The hole in the front.
Yeah. And the medical examiner, as with everyone else, found nothing to indicate that Dawn had been in a struggle or knocked out. The bullet wound was the only fresh mark on her body. So that pretty much falls apart. And to like add another layer of lies and confusion to this, a lot of the sources beyond that interview is from DeFeo's ex-wife, Geraldine Gates.
Mm-hmm.
And she asserted, like, in a 1986 interview, she asserts she married DeFeo in 1974. In Osana's book, she alleges that they married in 1970. In her 1993 divorce case, she says that they met in 1985, married in 1989, and divorced in 1993. So nobody can tell the truth, any of this. Like none of this is like he offered so many explanations, and they almost get more unbelievable as they go along. So I don't know where the truth lies, and I think, like, leading more into what yours is about, the really strange, unsolvable, unexplainable thing is that fact that 6 of them were shot, 6 of them were in the same position, 6 of them never left their beds, apparently never waking up. No struggle, no drugs, no sedatives.
And I'm guessing, like, the strange thing about that is that they don't appear to be just like thrown back and turned around. It looks like they were probably sleeping, besides Dawn.
Yeah, all of them. Like, even Dawn. Yeah, like, and there's no sign of any struggle at all. Like, there's no, like, I mean, this is before DNA or anything, but like no bruising, no scratches, nothing. Like, nothing to say that they were put there.
Right.
Or that they woke up at all. And just one thing to kind of, there's also the 911 call if we want to hear that, but it's not particularly interesting. It's just one of those people he brought along with him, and they're just trying to get the cops there. It wasn't him. It was somebody else. No, he didn't call the police ever. Like, one of those people he brought back to him actually called the police. Apparently he never thought that the police were necessary. But the attorney, I don't remember if I said his name or not, but William Weber, who defended him in court, the strange thing is that he says that George and Kathy Lutz approached him about an idea for a book, and then they made up the whole thing based on that. Like, he gave them information on the case. And, quote, he said, "We created this entire horror story over many bottles of wine. It is a hoax," unquote. That's what the attorney said. So, and then there's like this whole other thing where he like took them to court and stuff for his proceeds of the book and stuff, because they basically shut him out after that creation and meeting, according to him. But yeah, if you want to take over there, you can go from there. But that's the DeFeo murders, and obviously, I think reading between the lines and all these crazy stories, it was probably just him. I just cannot wrap my head around the logistics of the family being face down and no one waking up and no one moving with no evidence of sedatives or anything.
Yeah, and I guess if you were moving people a lot, there'd be like, it would have been noted that like the bodies were moved because blood was here and there, and like bodies was dragged.
Yeah, you'd have to be in the spot you got killed because blood spatter and everything else.
You can't drag me across the floor and blood not be across the floor. Obviously dragged.
Yeah. Interesting.
So what was the date that those murders happened? Do you have that date?
Oh, I knocked that off. His court date was in 1975. So let me check that. I didn't get the number. I've never been. I think
it was November 13th, 1974. Is that right?
Yeah. But I have a degree in history, and I've always been like really uninterested in dates and
Mm.
times.
Well, that's a horrible thing to be, because this is a long timeline, and I have great dates. I'm pretty sure I had
The murders happened on November 13th, 1974.
nailed it. All right, I didn't even cover this, but I it was overlapping. So these stories are very interconnected, even if they're very separate stories. So of course, you had this beautiful house, sitting on a canal that also has a pool, and it's massive. I think it was 5,000 square feet at the time. So you have this beautiful.
Did it have that really cool mirror that Margot Kidder dances in front of?
It didn't have that mirror. There's some artistic liabilities taken. You have this beautiful house that this prominent Italian family lived in. They were all brutally murdered, and there was a big trial. We're talking, there was only 9,200 people in there to modern day on this Long Island town, that you're probably looking at only a couple thousand in that time. So it was just this beautiful, upper scale area. And then that's where we enter George and Kathy Lutz. They were married on July 4th, 1975. They'd both been married prior to this, and Kathy had 3 children from her prior marriage. Those kids' names were Daniel, Christopher, and Missy, and eventually they would have their own kids later on. But these 3 kids are the only ones that matter, because they're the only ones that are in this house.
Whoa, back it up.
They are the kids.
Yeah.
I like a dummy, I didn't write their ages down, but they are they're not super young. I believe the youngest is like 4 or 5.
It's pretty young.
They're all relatively like in like the 9 to 4 range. So they're not super old, not super young. They're right in that, like they probably still remember everything that happened, and we'll get into that a little bit. So the Lutzes, George Lutz and his family were actually a very successful multi-generational family business in carpentry. And they had the idea for him to rehab this nice house, and he got it for a great deal after hearing about it from a friend. So they took the DeFeo house, even though in this time it was only a 52-year-old house. They were going to fix it up and modernize it, and they got a terrific deal. It was only $88,000. So at this time, everything I could find, they had no financial troubles at all. They were freshly married and just looking to expand and grow their family in this beautiful town. Now, both the Lutzes or the Lutz family were never known to be, scam artists or like oddballs or anything. They didn't have any huge outstanding debts at the time that anybody was aware of. And while that's important, is because it factors into what happens later on in the story. So, December 1975, George Lutz buys the house for $88,000, including an additional $400 that allowed them to keep all the furniture that was left over from the DeFeos.
Even the beds?
It doesn't specify if the beds were there. I'm guessing the beds probably were not there, but it doesn't say that they had been removed. So before they moved in, George had heard the history about the house. Well, of course, everyone knew what happened in this house, but a friend of his had insisted that he have it blessed before they moved in. So at the time, George was non-practicing Methodist and had no experience or no cares in the world, and didn't know what this would entail. But his wife, who'd grown up Catholic, did know what the process would be about when it comes to blessing the house. So on December 18th, 1975, the day the Lutz family was moving into their house, a Catholic priest came by really to bless.
Fast. Like, sorry to interrupt, but like 75 of December, that's like just barely over a year from the murders.
Yeah, it sat vacant for about 13 and a half months before they bought it. So
they're fresh in, like they're the next tenants.
Yep. So December 18th, you're talking, 13 months almost to the day. That's kind of crazy. They must have pushed them out pretty quick. I guess you said that same year he had his trial. I guess when there's nobody left in the family and one of them's in the jail, who else is going to take over the house? So the bank probably wanted to get their money as quick as possible.
I don't know how long the trial. I didn't know how long the trial lasted, but it started in October too. So like he could conceivably still be on trial when they moved in.
Yeah, but he was arrested that night though, right? November 13th. So he's been in jail the whole time. So the house probably.
Well, like not to go into our next episode too much, but in the movies, it seems like, oh, there's this thing we have to disclose. If this is the timeline, they like it was in news. It was still in the news when they're moving in. Like,
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So Kathy does suggest that they get a priest to come to the house.
Oh, yeah.
So
And nobody sleep on their bellies.
Yeah, Father Ralph J. Pecorano. That's what I'm going to say. Pecorano. In the movie, it's Mancuso because they did change his name, but his name is Father Ralph Pecorano.
Really gets stuck on that pick.
Yeah, we'll call him Ralph J. Pecorano. He's a lawyer. He was a judge of the Catholic court and a psychotherapist who lived in the local Sacred Heart rectory. He arrived to perform that day the blessing while Kathy and George were unpacking their belongings, and he went on to carry out the rites in the house. So this is what he claims had happened. So when he flicked the first holy water and began to pray, he heard a masculine voice demand that he, quote, get out. Yeah, he did. So none of what I'm going to tell you, he never told George or Kathy. He just left. He didn't leave in a hurry. He didn't say, he just left. So he does all this without telling him. He does go through the rest of the house, but that's all that really happened. There's some vague reports of like an inordinate amount of flies being in the house. He does corroborate that and say that yes, it was weird that there were flies in the house. The house had sat empty, and of course there were dead people in this house. So I don't know what
that might have still been there. So who knows?
Yeah,
I do remember in the book. It's been decades since I read the book, but I do remember. Like I think the cover even has flies on the cover. Like I do think there's a thing about like panes of glass having like being coated with flies. So
yeah. So he does say that there were flies, and for upstate New York in mid-December, that's very unusual. And he does specify that it was cold outside. Actually, on October 4th, 1979, the priest who Kathy, this man, Pecorano, he said, this is quotes from him, I was blessing the sewing room. It was cold. It was very cold. I'm like, well, gee, this is peculiar because it was a lovely day out and it was winter, yes, but that didn't count for the type of coldness I was feeling. I was also sprinkling holy water, and I heard a rather deep voice behind me say, get out. It seemed directed towards me, and that I was really quite startled by it. I felt a slap at one point in the face. I felt somebody slap me, and there was nobody there.
Who slaps a priest?
Yeah, and he didn't tell nothing. Per George and Kathy at the time, he just left. He did his thing and left. Now, they went in and they began to move in to the house. Sorry, my notes are a little bit funny here. So they're only in the house for less than a month. So I'll get to that quickly. But a lot of this Feather Pecorano stuff I'm going to cover real quick. So that was on December 18th. So this would be a week later, on December 24th, Christmas Eve of 1975. Father Pecorano called George Lutz and advised him to stay out of the second floor room where he had heard the mysterious voice.
Sewing room, is that right?
Yeah, this is the former bedroom of Mark and John Matthew DeFeo. Kathy had planned to use as the sewing room, but the call was cut short by static. Following his visit to the house, Father had allegedly developed a high fever and blisters on his hands similar to a stigmata. Now, he does have wounds on his hands, but it's questionable. It's been questioned by a lot of people if that actually is from this instance or not. I do have a quote from him. Let me see where this is. That says that he actually, like, that the phone call actually was cut out, and I think a couple people corroborated that. I think I put that down below. It might come back. There's a lot of stuff here, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. So this gets them settled into the house. Of course, it's easy to get settled in a house when you have somebody else's furniture. So as soon as they settle,
can we return to that for a second? Like, just like
very weird.
$400 to keep the murder house like furniture.
Yeah, it's weird that they were even charged that, right? Like, it would cost more to surely move it out and store it or sell it,
Yeah, I'd pay $400 to get rid of it. Like, I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not. I'm not a paranormal person. I don't really buy into all that stuff. But I don't want murder furniture.
Right. Yeah, no one wants murder furniture. So they settle into the house. A couple days go by. Nothing's been really experienced as of yet. George is working on the house. The kids are settled in, and it's Christmas break. So then things start getting weird. I don't have any specific dates here, but I'm just going to kind of breeze over what they say happened. So they claim that they have seen slime coming out of the walls, that knives and objects were being thrown around the kitchen, and that there's a red-eyed creature resembling a pig that the youngest daughter would see, and she called it Jody. George says that he saw his wife levitating above their bed, and every morning he would wake up at 3:15 a.m. in the morning, which supposedly is when those murders took place. So now one of the children's name, where is this? Now Chris, I think he's the oldest son. He said that he never saw children running around like the dead children in the 2005 movie. He said that was a disgusting display of Hollywood, embellishing what happened to them as children. But he did see something. Now they found a room that was later dubbed the Red Room. It was a room hidden inside a closet in the basement that George claimed stunk of rotten flesh and excrement. Later on, there's video of them going back to the house and showing this room. And the room is it's not in horrible condition. And it's actually not really that hidden. All the movies kind of show it as this hidden room.
Right.
But they actually stored all their children's toys there. And it's kind of strange because they stored them in the basement in this like...
Was it the murder toys?
Yeah, the kids' current toys, I'm guessing, because they were all rather young.
I know they kept the other murder toys.
Oh, I don't think it was there. I think it was like maybe I think it was the Lutz's though.
I do remember because I think I read this book. I was in like 6th, 7th grade tops, and I remember when they discovered the Red Room, like being so scared that I threw the book across the room. Like that was the only time in my life where I was that scared reading something, and I had to stop for a while.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you about the book and so the next part of this episode, if you're curious, if you're at this point, like what else are they going to talk? There's a lot more still for me to dive into, but we'll talk about how things have been adapted, what they were changed, the artistic license and kind of the differences in everybody's storytelling. But back to the story. So after these things started happening, George decided to bless the house himself. So what he did was he held a crucifix in every room. He walked in room by room, reciting the Lord's Prayer. And he said while he did this, he heard disembodied voices telling him to stop. This takes us to January 14th. I believe that's 28 days later. I believe that's how long they're in here.
You just want to say that because it's a movie title?
No, it's 28 days. Yeah. So 28 days later on January 14th, the Lutzes decide to leave the house. So they get in touch with the priest who's been coming to their house, and they take some of their belongings and they stay at Kathy's mother's house in Deer Park, New York, while they sort everything out with the house and figure out what the hell they're going to do. They claim for the priest. Now he doesn't come back, but they stay with their family. But they claim that the phenomenon had followed them to the mother's house, and they said that they had seen greenish black slime coming up the staircase towards them.
That's not
good. Let's see. So on January 14th, 1976, George, Kathy, the 3 kids, and their dog Harry left. They left everything behind besides with
the dog, by the way.
What's that?
You were talking very like factual, then you talked about the dog and your voice went like, and the dog Harry.
And the dog Harry, who was a good boy. The next day, they had movers arrive and they removed their possessions to send to the Lutz's new address. The movers didn't report any paranormal activity while they were in the house. And so that takes us to, I don't have anything that happened between this and then February 13th, 1976. But what I'm guessing happened is because they were only there for 28 days in this small town, word got out. I'm sure their neighbors saw them move in, move out, and they were like, what the hell's happening? Because on February 13th, they met in a small attorney's office in a New York. It's called Patchogue. Patchagoo. Yeah, we'll say Patchagoo, New York. In the room, they invited press, who would be introduced for the first time to George and Kathy Lutz. Now, George wanted to hold this meeting to correct facts that had been swirling around the town. He said that him and his family had not seen, quote, human shapes or flying objects around their house, nor had they heard any wailing sounds. These are all quotes, wailing in quotes, and, quote, moving couches. But yes, they had left the house after only owning it for a month with just 3 changes of clothes apiece. Because of our concern, this is a quote, because of our concern for our own personal safety of our family, that's the only thing he said. And this was all that he was willing to share. And the reporters tried to press him for more and more and more. And he said, no, I'm done, and left. Now, shortly after this statement, a book editor at Prentice Hall introduced George and Kathy to Jay Anson, a professional writer who had published a number of, quote, behind the scenes and making of books about films and personalities throughout the 70s. They didn't at first want to work with him, but they decided it was a great deal, and he actually had their best interest, and blah, 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 blah. So they did submit, their working with him was submitting about 40 to 50 hours of recorded tapes recalling the events that happened in those 28 days. And he used those to write the book, which was later released about 6 months after this. And of course, it was called The Amityville Horror. The book became a bestseller and stayed on the bestseller list for 42 weeks. By 81, it had gone through 37 printings and sold over 7 million copies. So,
and the movie was like 79 or something, right?
Yep.
70.
So I'm gonna shrink everything as quick as I can from here to there. So in 1976, notable paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren led a group that concluded the evil forces were at work after an infamous, quote, psychic slumber party that they held there, during which they claimed to have obtained photographic evidence of a ghost by Gene Campbell. Gene Campbell was a professional photographer who had set up an automatic camera to shoot off black and white infrared footage at night. Of course, the photo, you've probably seen this, even if you didn't know it was from Amityville. It's like a little boy. It's a black and white photo of like a little boy peeking out of a window, or out of not a window, a door frame, looking at the camera.
Like the stairway or whatever.
Yeah. Ed was quoted saying, "This was no ordinary haunted house. On a scale of 1 to 10, this house was a 10. So haunted house, rate'em.com. This was a 10, according to Ed and Lorraine. Yeah. So they eventually sold the house. They didn't sell it right away. It took about 14 months for the Lutzes to put it on sale, and it just stood empty. They didn't really know what to do with it. Of course, they were doing a lot of other things at the time, like writing this book and moving their family. It's actually, I don't really follow too much after this with the actual family, like where they moved and what happened to them. But the family that moved in after them was called the Cromarties. They moved in the spring of 77. Actually, April 1st is what Jim Cromartie says. We were out here like a week and then came to this Good Housekeeping article about the Amityville Horror that the Lutz are talking about. So this article was written by Paul Hoffman, who'd written about the case in the New York Daily News and published in 1976 magazine. It was titled, "Our Dream House Was Haunted." The article would become the subject of lawsuits by the Lutzes, who claimed the article invaded their privacy. This lawsuit, in which the Lutzes sued Good Housekeeping, the author, and the New York Daily News, as well as several other parties for invasion of privacy, was unsuccessful. So they made not a penny. They were actually losing money in a lot of these early cases. But the Cromarties would actually end up suing the Lutzes, Anson, the book publisher, for $1.5 million or $1.1 million in assorted damages for fraud, trying to get them to admit that the subtitle of Anson's book, A True Story, wasn't quite what it was cracked up to be. It took 3 years for them to settle for that $1.1 million. In June 1979, George and Kathy took a lie detector test concerning the events in the house, and they both passed with flying colors. Now, July 1979, a month after they took that lie detector test, William Weber, who you mentioned, the attorney for DeFeo, went out to the press and said that the Lutzes had made up the entire story of the bottle of wine. He he said that he had been approached and told a publisher they would be happy to offer a large advance for the book about the DeFeo case. He tried to get the Lutzes to go in on it. His notion was that some of the royalties would even be split with DeFeo, who was in jail at this time. The Lutzes went, of course, with Anson. But Weber tried to carry on with himself. He was a freelance writer. He enlisted to write the book and different articles, and he's actually the one that helped with the Good Housekeeping article. And
what a weird place for that to publish. Good Housekeeping.
Yeah, I want to read Good Housekeeping in the late 70s when they were just talking about like mass murders. And also how to make your drapes look shorter in the living room. Or I don't know what Good Housekeeping's about, or like how to keep
definitely not Amityville Horror.
Yeah,
Good Housekeeping about that.
Yeah. So as an adult, Daniel Lutz, one of the kids, insisted that all this had happened to him as a kid. Quote, "I was possessed by a spirit that I could not get rid of on my own," he insisted. Danny was one of Kathy's children, and he claimed that everything had happened, but it had nothing to do with what the DeFeos, or about the DeFeo case. He said it was actually his stepfather, George, who had summoned the bad spirits with his dabblings in Satanism and the occult. Now, George, this is all depicted in my Amityville Horror documentary, where he comes clean. Daniel, none of the kids are very wealthy. Daniel, at the time, was working for UPS, living in Brooklyn, New York. He doesn't look like he has very much money, and so he doesn't really have a lot to gain from anything at this point. If anything, like it seems like if he could blow George out of the water, he would.
Yeah, he did, right?
So he did say that George would beat him with a wooden spoon as punishment, which Chris also said similar stories and blames George for the haunting. Missy, the youngest kid, she has never spoken publicly to anybody about this at this time, so I couldn't find anything from her. But both Chris and Daniel both say that it wasn't the DeFeos, it was George and what George was getting into and his bad vibes and everything. Yeah. Now, everything I could find doesn't say, a lot of people are like, well, they wrote the book and they created this story to get rich and to pay for the house and all these debts that George has. But everything I found didn't put the family in debt at all. And it actually didn't say that they made that much from the books or the movies. They did make money, but they didn't make, millions and millions of dollars. They were actually very comfortable when they moved in this house and through most of raising their family. But actually later on in their lives, they lost a lot of their wealth and fortune.
And they got divorced.
What's that?
They got divorced too, right?
They did get divorced in the 80s. So for me, it's like if, one of them didn't want to go along with it forever, or you got three kids that were all cognitive at the time, like certainly there's 5 parties that over 25 years, I guess now, further than that, now we're talking 40 years, right? 40 plus years, somebody would be the whistleblower. But George was quoted, both Kathy and George have died. Kathy died in 2004 of emphysema, and George died of a heart disease in 2006, right after the release of the remake of the film. They maintained that everything that was said in the book was, quote, mostly true. Of course, they acknowledge, and so does Anson, that he took artistic liberties to make it, juicier and more and scarier. George was quoted saying that, "I believe that this has stayed alive for 25 years because it is a true story. It doesn't mean that everything that has ever been said about it is true. It's certainly not a hoax. It's real easy to call something a hoax. And I wish it was. It's not, though." So that's pretty much the end. I do have like some common questions I ran into that people would either debunk or that I was.
And no one else ever reported any activity since, like anyone who's lived there.
Yeah, so it's been owned by, I think, 4 other families. I was trying to confirm it in the last couple of years. I think it's either 4 or 5 families, but no one else has had anything else happen to them. But of course, I don't know why you would want that. Like, certainly you're buying the house knowing all this stuff has happened in it, but you probably don't want the spotlight on you, seeing how it's affected their lives. So even if something did happen, you probably would keep it quiet, I'm guessing.
I guess depends on how bad. Like 28 days late, like of living there, moving out, makes it sound like pretty untenable. Like nobody would want to live there very long.
So a couple things. like the movies and a number of articles mentioned that the house was built on an Indian burial ground, but according to the Amityville Historical Society, that is not the case. It was just land. It looks like, did the priest really get static on the phone when you tried to call them on Christmas Eve? There's in search of actually they followed up on this, and in
Leonard Nimoy was on the case.
Yeah, in 1979 they interviewed that Pecorano, and he said that there was noise interference that prevented any phone communication between him and the family, so he could not warn them.
I just want a podcast of you saying Pecorano over.
Pecorano. Jody was real. Real to Missy, at least. Okay. Like George did say that Missy had an imaginary friend named Jody that she would play with in the house, and that the entity would present itself in different forms, including an angel and then that large demonic pig that there's like a pretty cool, not cool, but a pretty interesting drawing from Missy of what Jody is.
Well, didn't it leave like footprints in the snow and stuff too? Because I believe
that, but maybe that's something else. So I don't know. That might be in the pop culture version of this.
In the book, I'm not sure.
Daniel Lutz did get his hand smashed in the windows, and he said, "quote It was skin on skin," emphasizing the severity of the injury when it crashed down and was stuck on his hands. He did say that did happen. He says, so a couple of things we can confirm here is that George really was known to be dabbling in the occult, which is interesting.
Everybody starts that way. Don't do it. Keep the Ouija boards at home. I mean,
keep them at home, kids.
No, away from home. I don't know. Where do you keep them?
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it. Looks like the rest of the stuff I already covered. So, so that's the Amityville Horror as it pertains to the Lutzes. So all of them have maintained to this day that yes, it all did happen. That this weird stuff happened. Of course, there's a lot of stuff about the movies I could debunk, and maybe I'll bring some of that up on episode or part 2. But the Lutz's story is interesting because it happens so quick. So really the horrifying stuff really only happens over the course of like 15 to 16 days from what I can tell. There's not a lot of it didn't appear anybody kept a diary about like day 1. There were scratches on the wall or whatever, but it seems to like slowly have escalated up into that point.
Yeah.
And then it just kind of stopped. I believe Ronnie DeFeo is still alive in jail right now.
Yeah.
Somehow he's
still in the 70s. He was like 18, 20, something like that. So
yeah. So that's it. That's the family. And did you learn anything like having read the book? Did my storytelling reveal anything to you? Did I miss anything that you remember from the book?
Your Pecorano. That's my major takeaway.
Mancuso is how I think he's in the book as Mancuso and in at least the 79 movie.
I mean, yeah, that's basically what I remember with some like narrative flourishes, of course. But I'm that I'm a cynic, and I don't distrust anyone who's experienced something paranormal, who's seen something and has those experiences. I'm not calling those people liars. But I have a real hard time taking the leap to like demons / dead people / I mean, there's energy in the universe we don't understand, and we can explore that all we want. But like when people jump to like demonic forces and stuff, I kind of roll my eyes a little bit. Saying that, like it is interesting. Like I'm on the fence with the Lutz thing. Like it's, of course, like on one hand, I'm like, of course they kept their story the whole time because they're still selling books and they're still having movies. Why would they just all like come out and say it's a hoax now? But
I don't think, I don't know everything. So that's what I was really trying to look at is like the wealth of that family. And certainly I'm not going to say that like they didn't make any money, but I don't know what the value of true crime stories was in the 70s. I don't know if it was like today. I don't think there was $1 million option. I'm guessing the publisher probably got a great deal, and so did MGM.
Yeah, I'm sure, but maybe people made money off of them. I don't know. But
that's everything that I read makes it sound like that they got pretty taken advantage of, and that at least their lawyer was trying to sue a lot of people to gain money, but they were just burning a lot of money. So they ended up losing $1 million to the family moved in after him. So I'm guessing that they just kind of went on, whatever money they were making, they were probably losing it in lawsuits and just like other expenses. And
that's the other side of me is like, why? Like, I mean, there is the profitability of it. You can make that thing, but like, why even open yourself up to this like ridicule and have it all be public and stuff unless you really believed it? That's my other side.
Yeah, I just think it's so
because people
particularly
aren't to it. There's going to be so many people just mocking you for the rest of your life when you say this out loud.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the family and the children impacted by it. Of course, I mean, George doesn't come out quite the good guy in any of this. Like, it looks like he, at least was fairly abusive.
Is that a scale?
Like, well, I was thinking about it. I was like, I think disciplining your children with some kind of like abuse was like probably more.
Oh yeah, like there's
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was more something that happened in this time frame. So I'm guessing like, they say to hit him with like wooden spoons and stuff. They didn't say like he broke his arms or anything, but
it's still abuse. I mean, like that just means he was more socially acceptable in his abuse. Like it's still not cool.
Yeah, I'm just trying to place like, and they all say that. I wish we would hear from the youngest one, although her memory is probably maybe the fuzziest. So maybe for her it is more of a horror story. I mean, Daniel, if you watch the documentary, I mean, it is. Yeah. I mean, he's shook for life.
He struggled. He meets with Lorraine in that doc too. I remember that. That's like the craziest sequence I've ever seen on film in a documentary for a while. Like she brings out a piece of the crucifix apparently and stuff. Like it's nuts. But I just like, that's the other part of me is like none of them are super old. Like none of them are in their like late teens or anything. So I wonder how much of this could be like suggestion. Like if this guy was abusive and angry and shaking them at 3 a.m. and telling them all these things, maybe their memory's just like warped. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, so Daniel Lutz is 54. Christopher, he goes by his maiden name, which is Quarantino, I believe.
Quarantino, really?
Yeah, it is. Quarantino.
Oh, I thought it was like
he is
in coronavirus age.
I mean, so they're not that old. So he was born. So Daniel Lutz was born. He was 10 years old when this was happening. Yeah. And then Chris
forming your brain at that point.
And Chris was 7. I mean, like 7 and 10, I do remember.
You do, but our memories at that age are also influenced heavily by our parents telling us stories for the rest of our lives.
Like, yeah. I mean, like Missy was only 5, so I don't think we probably need to know anything from her really. But like, I think you have 2 kids that like Daniel specifically, who's 10 years old. Like, I mean, 10 years old, like I think of like the things I do remember in that time frame, like even 7 are like things like probably that would be like this, that were so vivid in my mind that it would be hard to probably shake.
Memory is a tricky thing too. Like they could have been gaslighted for years. Like, oh yeah, that happened from your parents, like, or your mother or something. Like,
yeah, but even then, like their parents have been dead for almost 15 years now. And I mean, Jay Anson died in 1980 from a heart attack as well.
Damn hearts.
It's just kind of, I don't know. I think like it's one thing to like not want to like ruin your family's legacy while they're alive, but then, and be the naysayer of the family. But then at some point you got to be like, well, this is actually not what happened. But in that documentary, it's like, no, pretty much most that happened. I mean, sure, there's a lot of embellishments, but like the house was actually haunted. I just think it's like at some point somebody should be breaking, right? And not only that, they had so many acquaintances and friends and people that are still alive that now that he died, like why not be the whistleblower?
I just think they might be warped. Like, I mean, I'm sure I have warped childhood memories that were based on
Well, not
what I
even the
was.
kids. I'm just saying, like, why not like
Oh, like
publishers or something? You know, all the people. There were so many people in their network of these people, and certainly if like it was a full lie, why not
besides
leave
that
the
attorney,
reveal?
but he was losing out on money, so he has motives other places too. So you're not necessarily trustworthy.
I mean, he was willing to pay DeFeo.
Yeah.
He wanted to give him money, so I don't really think he's like the one sketchball that's been in it for money since the beginning.
And as my story told, like anything DeFeo or that side said, his wife, anything, it just shifts constantly. So who knows what's real there? Like they just change their stories constantly.
I mean, yeah, Ryan DeFeo went from mob to his sister to the devil, and then back. You know, he's all over the place. So I'm not really sure his sanity is really the best. His perspective is the best to take.
Yeah.
But it is like it is an interesting story. You know, I think it's easy to see why people are fascinated with it. It's a lot of weird stuff happens, even if it's just like disembodied voices or you know, waking up at 3:15, like even just those things. Like even if you want to say like he did say George in his later, before he died, he did say like the green slime never really happened or anything like that. Um,
Yeah.
but even if it's just like disembodied voices and cold spots, you know, more traditional haunting things, and it's still in the 3:15 and stuff like that. I think it's still interesting.
It is. But like, this has been great. And I love talking about this stuff, but I'm kind of even more excited for our discussion next week because then we can talk about like the bigger, like, why are we still talking about this 40 years later? Right. You know, like that's
Yeah.
what's.
Well, any other thoughts on the DeFeos or the Lutzes?
I still like. I know you're more tend to like you
I
paranormal.
want to believe. I have the poster behind me. I need to have that in my office, right? I need to have the.
You really do. And
Because it's
I come from a different school than you with all that stuff. So like the DeFeo stuff's more like I don't want to say I like true crime because it's awful and it's real people's lives and terrible things happen, but I find it very like fascinating. So like the DeFeo stuff is very fascinating to me. Like one, that a person could live in a household with family and do that, and two, the things we talked about, like the inconsistencies and the lies and the fact that they're all still in their beds and all this. That's intriguing to me. So like the Lutz is less so to me because it like while it all could be true, it is very convenient timing that they moved into this house right before the trial ended or right after the trial ended and started like building on this. Oh God. I want our podcast to be a video cast right now because Adam just added I want to believe virtual background to our thing, and it's amazing.
it's backwards for some reason. I don't know what's happening here.
Oh no, sideways. Oh God, it's upside down.
It won't go their way.
All right.
Keep,
I don't know how to
finish your statement.
I don't know how. I'm just looking at you. Oh goodness. But yeah, like the Lutz it seems very opportunistic, but I see the other side of like it's very like as you see in the documentary, it's very damaging to like a family and their psychology and stuff. So I see the side both ways that way, but I don't think I hate to be closed-minded because I want to be open-minded about anything, but I really don't think I'll ever be swayed to think that paranormal stuff is demons or you're just leaning out. I don't think it's demons or like Aunt Mildred from 1862 walking around. I can't buy into that stuff. Like,
yeah.
Universal properties that we don't know, I can listen to you on that. But like I can't, like, no remnants of Civil War battles here, Indian burial grounds, all that nonsense. I can't. I just don't.
I think for me, what's always interesting about stories like this is, well, this one's, I think it's a great story for us to start on because I think I didn't think about it at all. I just was like, let's do Amityville Horror. And then the more I looked about it, I was like, surely there's just a podcast I can listen to and learn all this information. And I couldn't find any. And I was like, what the fuck? This is a very famous story. There's been a bunch of movies and books. But mostly it was just like, oh, it's based on a true story that has some facts to it. And then there's a bunch of movies we can watch. So it's an easy one to do for this podcast. And then little did I know that this would be a two-parter and that there is a shit ton of movies and it's influence on not only pop culture, but just the world of true crime, I think, and supernatural experiences. I mean, it really touches everything. I mean, you're talking about the Warrens, you're talking about, mass, true crime publishing. You're talking about all these things that in mid 70s were not, if they weren't the first, they were tackling, these things on a national level. And, it was a bestseller for, over years.
Yeah.
7 million copies sold.
And I don't know, that's why I'm so excited for next week, because we can talk about it in that broader scope. And I have a presentation I can do if you want. I've done it a few times about like horror as allegory, and I think this fits really nicely into that. Like, there's something about the DeFeo thing and then the Lutz thing that tapped into some like current nuclear family fears and everything else that we were experiencing in the 70s. The breakdown of the nuclear family and everything. It's really interesting to me, and I want to talk about that. But now we've already hit our nightmare hour.
Yeah, we've hit our hour. So part 2 is going to talk about. So we're going to cover a handful of the movies and how they've portrayed this story. So we're going to cover, I think, just the theatrical ones is what we've decided. So that would be 1 through 4. 1 through 4, the remake. No, 1 through 3, the remake, and then the Jason Blum one, Amityville Awakening, which was the last one to have a limited theatrical. So we'll cover those 5 films and kind of and what their perspectives, how they adapted things differently. It's interesting. The 79 to 2005 is actually a lot of fun to go back to back. So in preparation for this, if you want to hear our thoughts, you can watch 1 to 3, the remake, and then Amityville Awakening. Those are the films we're going to talk about, but we're also going to talk about the book, the influence on pop culture, the influence on just culture and culturally. Like this is like a monumental story. What else do you want to talk about? We're going to cover it all in the next one.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I mean, that's good. I think this is the point where normal podcasts, you tell them like they can email our thoughts and all that stuff about it, where to follow us and all that good stuff.
Am I supposed to do that?
I think so. I did the intro. This is your outro time.
Oh, okay. So I do the outro. So you could find us, I believe now going forward, if it's not today, it'll be the following week, but we will be on every major podcast service. So Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, whatever you're into these days, you could subscribe to our RSS feed. So whenever we drop a new episode, which will be weekly, you'll be able to follow along with us. Now, if you want to contact us and get a hold of us or drop us any notes, corrections, things like that, that's nightmarehourpod@gmail.com. That's nightmarehourpod@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook right now, which we'll post kind of similar updates of what we're going to be talking about, what we're doing. And that's just facebook.com/the Nightmare Hour Pod. That's all we have right now. We're not doing Twitter or Instagram because that's just too overwhelming. So we'll just keep everything on Facebook right now. And we're a podcast, man. You got to listen to us. We're going to have some fun special video episodes, and it'll be a lot of fun. We're going to do a lot of cool stuff. We're going to have guests from time to time.
That's it. Yeah, I put it on my FB. Is that what people call Facebook now? FBs? The
Sure.
FB? All right. My FBs, I put it on, and that's like at least half of this, the reason we started is because of this quarantine and being at home, and like horror to me as a kid, like that's been my community, and it's brought so much to my life, and I missed it. So like when we were talking about this, like, let's do this. Like I love Adam. I've loved him for a long time, will love him, and I love talking to him, but I really do want this to be like, let's get the community back together. Let's get everybody back together. So seriously, like email, Facebook us, all this stuff. We'll read everything we can online or on our pod. We'll involve you. It's not just us two. We want everybody. So please get our horror community back. We're stuck at home. Let's do this.
Yeah, we want to make it not only engaging, but hopefully educational. It was definitely educational to me. I've never read anything about this, never listened to a podcast, so it was fun. And I didn't listen to anything with the DeFeo, so it was nice to to hear and research the supposed true stories and the true crime elements of it. And then, of course, concurrently be watching the movies and how that's handled. Specifically, it'll be interesting to talk about Amityville 2 because a number of reasons. We'll get into that next week. But that's going to be that's it for this week's episode. This very first episode of the Nightmare Hour podcast. Thank you for joining us. It's been a treat.
It has been a treat. I've really enjoyed this. This is great. It's good to be back.
Did you say let's go take a bath?
Right now with our two-sided microphone.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode. Please, if you like the podcast, share it with your friends. We're going to try to build this community so big that it becomes a commune, and then we all know where it goes from there. We'll likely do an episode on it. All right, anything else? You have a good sign off yet?
No, I've been thinking, but no.
How about time's up?
Oh, like 60 minutes, but in reverse.
Yeah, it just like whenever we don't even sign off. It just like we stop talking and then the clock ticks and that's it.
Like a Godfather clock.
Yeah, click 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 click. We'll have some clever sign off. Everyone just wants to say, all right, until then, stay scared, like Stephen King, right?
Yeah, but like something about an hour, 60 minutes. I don't know. I got nothing.
Think about it. We'll think about it some more. All right, we will see you next week with part 2 of the Amityville Horror.